This is Local Edition. Brad Pomerance here in San Diego County, joined by Ben Kalasho. He is a councilman in the city of El Cajon. And El Cajon is home, no one may realize this, but to the second largest group of Iraqis in the United States.
That's correct.
The Iraqi diaspora is quite well represented in El Cajon, and you're part of that diaspora. Talk to us about your community known as the Chaldean Community of Iraq.
Well, the Chaldean Community, like you mentioned, it's the second largest in El Cajon, following Detroit, Michigan. And it depends which Chaldean community you're speaking of. And what I mean is, are you talking about the ones that came 30, 40 years ago? Or are you talking about refugees? Because there's a distinction between immigrants like myself and refugees. And that distinction.
And I want to make that distinction. I also would mention that the individual that runs operations for Cox in California is Chaldean himself, Sam Atisha. And so I was not aware of the Chaldean community at all until I met Sam. And he told me about the rich history of the Chaldean community. Happened to be Christians, which one wouldn't realize. There's a significant population of Christians in Iraq. So let's talk about the immigrants from, it's northern Iraq, correct? The Chaldean community, of which you are one.
Yeah, so Chaldeans and Assyrians, I'm going to use this word interchangeably.
Sure.
And basically, the ones who are immigrants have made extensive headway with regards to being professionals, with being entrepreneurs, innovators, leaders, like you mentioned, the boss here. So they reside primarily in Rancho San Diego. So that's on the unincorporated part of El Cajon. While the address says El Cajon, it's not within the city. And so this is a very obviously tight-knit community in the sense where everything revolves around the Chaldean Catholic Church, which is a Roman Catholic Eastern Rite. And what we're seeing now, the difference is the refugee population coming in, not just from Iraq, but now we're seeing Syrian refugees coming in.
And I want to talk about the refugee population. I would also mention you are the first Chaldean to be elected, we believe, in the United States of America, and also the youngest elected in the city of El Cajon. So let's talk about refugees, because what we do know as it relates to Syrians, in 2016, there were 1,450 that were brought from Syria into California, 800 in San Diego County, and many of them went to El Cajon. And so talk to us about your refugee community, either from Syria or Iraq.
Well, I think that when you talk about the refugee community, it's important to separate yourself from having from having any bias, right? So
that's tricky for some.
It definitely is. But once you take into consideration El Cajon's poor economy, we have some 28% of the people who live below the poverty line, and we have just copious amounts of homeless people. So the idea to take in more refugees, while it may sound good, and obviously we have to help as many people as we can, we have inherent problems in El Cajon that we have to tackle first. So our priorities have to be in order. And that was something that I campaigned on. And I'll be the first to admit I got a lot of fire from that. Obviously, people are saying, we want to take in refugees. Listen, we have to take in refugees. I'm just not sure that El Cajon could sustain based on its economic status.
Well, the challenge becomes, because of the large Arab community, now many Arab Americans living in El Cajon, it seems like a natural fit. Not that these folks won't become successful, integrated Americans, but look, when you move to a strange land, there's comfort in your own. And so I have to think that's a push-pull that El Cajon faces.
Look, you could be someone who is for immigration and taking in refugees, and at the same time be concerned with taking in refugees and immigration. So this conversation has been hijacked by either party, and it's not a party thing. I think the conversation is about the economy, right? So when you're talking about immigrants, and I'm going to paint this with a broad brush here, and some people are going to view this and they're going to say, well, he's speaking in generality. We only have 9 minutes,
right?
So you just need to give me that leeway. So typically, an immigrant is somebody who usually sells their home, sells their business, makes that initial idea with their family to say, we're going to move to a Western country or Australia, Canada, United States. And then they make that move, and once they enter the borders, they learn to jettison any sort of parts of their culture which don't mend and mesh well with modern Western culture. And so then you start to hear them say things like we say, like Chaldean American, Mexican American. They bring in the good parts of their culture, but they know enough to understand that some parts of their culture might be archaic or outdated, and so they leave those at the border. For refugees, unfortunately, and it's to no fault of their own, that they come from genocide and war-torn country, that they are then propositioned by the UN to say, through either a sponsorship program, where they wanted to go. And so unfortunately, the decision is forced upon them. And so they end up coming here into a place like El Cajon, and where they really didn't want to be. So I mean, you just have to think pragmatically about this.
What do we do then? I mean, look, these people, they could easily be killed if they stay in Syria or portions of war-torn Iraq. And I've seen this movie before with Vietnamese, with Koreans, with Jews. I mean, the 20th century was riddled with refugee crises, and oftentimes America slammed the door on these refugees.
And I'm not suggesting that. So that's not the suggestion here. But I worked on this project with a group trying to create a safe haven for Christians and other minorities in Iraq, right? To create another province where Western countries would arm, train to create a force that could protect and that could be self-sustaining and protect them in their own land and country. You have to understand that it's a poor deal for all parties involved. And I'll give you an example. There's a gentleman I spoke with 2 days ago who said, I was an engineer back in Iraq. He was making close to the equivalence of $85,000 here now. And now he bags groceries at a local supermarket for minimum wage. So you have to be honest and be pragmatic when you make that distinction between what a refugee is and what an immigrant is. An immigrant is somebody who came and said, I'm going to take that job.
But what we know is that the current administration is not really interested in welcoming refugees, especially from now 6 countries. Iraq has been excluded from the list. They were on the list initially. And look, that issue is going through the courts, but what do you make of that? I mean, you came, I believe, as an immigrant, not as a refugee. It's a charged issue.
It definitely is. I mean, look, I say this again, you could be for immigration and still be concerned with immigration. If the question is, do we strengthen our vetting process even more, then of course I'm for it. But what I'm not for, what I'm vehemently opposed to, is any ban on, say, Muslims. That's obviously just foolish. It's ridiculous to say. But we have to look seriously at countries that are culprits in producing terrorism, right? So we have to, like Saudi Arabia.
Right, they're not on the list.
No, and that's what I started by saying is it gets politicized. This issue is not political. This issue is about safety. It's about a sense of safety for travelers, for who's coming in and out of our borders. The conversation about Mexico and we need to build a wall, that was just a non sequitur, I think, for me. So you have to talk about, if you're going to do a ban, if Saudi Arabia is not in it, then we're not being honest with ourselves.
Let's have you back. I'd love to have you continue that conversation. His name is Ben Kalasho. He is a councilman in the city of El Cajon. My name is Brad Pomerance. You're joining us from San Diego County on Local Edition.